Well, hello and welcome to the Panachecast. Pete and I are here today with Rupert Vernals, who's from MBA Academy. We're pleased to have Rupert with us today. I think he's going to have a lot of interesting things to say for all the viewers out there who are starting their own companies and as startups. Rupert's been down that path before. And for the lawyers watching, Rupert's course is geared towards MBA essentials for lawyers who are looking to build strategy and improve their own offerings. So I've been through Rupert's course before and I found it very engaging. So that's why we wanted to have Rupert on the show. So welcome.
Cool, thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks for coming. And well, if we could just start, if you could just give us a bit of background as to what you did before you started your new company, that would be great.
Yeah, so I used to work as a lawyer in-house for Vodafone, and then more recently for Osborne Clarke in their Silicon Valley office, well, Bristol, and then a Silicon Valley office in California. Okay. Mainly working with either startups, so a mix of different businesses really. Lots of also US law firms who didn't have any presence in Europe, but who had clients in Europe and who wanted on the ground real-time advice, so working with those sorts of businesses. Yeah. And what was really interesting in that period was lots of the US laws I worked with at the time were just a bit more switched on commercially than I was, or with other European laws I'd worked with previously. And there were big benefits to that, which kind of led into me doing MBA courses. So great.
So you took an MBA, while you were working at Osborne Clarke?
No. So what happened was, I worked in Osborne Clarke in California, and lots of those laws were more switched on, and because of that, there were real big benefits to those laws being more switched on commercially. They'd have better conversations with their clients, ask them more intelligent questions, home in on those issues. And clients genuinely liked it when their lawyers took an interest in them and in the business. And that there were also a load of other benefits to that. So they'd share more information with them about the business. They'd get them in earlier in a deal because they knew they understood their business. But the other big benefit to that was the lawyers actually enjoyed their work more when they understood why they were doing something. So there's some research that's been done, not just on lawyers, but professionals globally, that says that lawyers professionals only enjoy their work between 20 to 30% of the time. Okay. Tolerating it the rest of the time, doing it with all care and diligence, but without any real passion. Yeah. And that obviously has an impact on their work and their enjoyment of work. What they also say is if they can understand their clients, why they're asking for them advice, what's the background, what's the bigger picture, they can connect with their work at a deeper level, a more intellectual level. They can have, those better conversations, but they got more meaning, purpose, fulfillment out of their work. So not only are they better lawyers, they're actually happier lawyers as well as a result. And that was something that I was really interested in, and just enjoying my work more. So that was key. So understanding the business was key. But everyone always said you have to understand your clients. Every professional knows you need to know something about your clients. But I just purely relied on kind of random opportunistic insights in the client. When someone said analyse a client, I didn't have a clue where to start. So when I moved back to the UK, I decided to do an MBA, so remortgaged, did an MBA, but I live in Bristol and at good business schools, Bath Business School, so I went there. And then as I went through the year, it became clear there were some frameworks and methodologies that would just be really useful for all lawyers and all professionals really to be familiar with, that you never learn. It seems crazy that half of a professional's work is working with not just knowing their own technical side of things, but working with the business. You never cover any of those things. It just seemed crazy to me that was the case. So as I went through the year, there were some frameworks that were just not quick to understand, but they could apply really quickly. We all know professionals never have the time to take a day out of the office to analyse a business, but perhaps if they've got 5 minutes here and there in the taxi on the way to see the client, or they get the phone call, the client's arrived, and start thinking, okay, let's just quickly think about who their competitors are, how their marketplace is changing, just using some of those frameworks that would have a big impact on them. So on completing my MBA then, this is back in 2007 then now, I set up the business then, delivering just small bite-sized MBA courses initially to law firms, then a variety of other businesses as well on the back of that.
And was that the key aspect for you of distilling this down into small chunks, rather than assuming that someone has to go and do a full MBA course at a university and take all that time out to do that? It was to distill it down into little chunks that were actually useful to people and pull out those key aspects.
That was the thing that took all the time, because when I started the business, I got a small business loan to get started, I thought it would take about 2 or 3 months to write the content, to actually put something decent together. It took about 2 years really of writing. But it was that, just extracting those things that were genuinely useful, because there's all sorts of things you learn on an MBA course that are just not relevant to professionals. Lots of things that they know already. So on my MBA, we had people from healthcare, people from charities, who'd never had any exposure to business, so they had to understand just the really basics of what a business was, and some of the things that most people would take for granted. So you cover lots of basics like that. You also cover all sorts of issues in terms of understanding finances and investment and so on. Again, which aren't all that important to people's day-to-day work. They might be useful for people to be familiar with some of those concepts. Yeah. But in terms of them going to their desks and thinking, right now, how am I going to use that? Most of that information isn't all that useful. And so what I wanted to do was have something which had a big impact on them. So, okay, right now I can see I can use that today. And I've had that even during lunchtime. So I run a course and people have a lunchtime conversation with the client and say, well, I've actually used what we've learned this morning on that call that I just had with the client. And that was the key. Yeah.
That's great. We'll get into the detail of the course in a bit later, but I just want to peel it back a little bit if we can, because I always love the stories of the people who are in very respectable and good jobs, as you were, being a private practice lawyer and a period in-house as well in America and the UK. And then you just decided to say go in a completely different direction with nothing necessarily in front of you. So it was a brave choice to do it.
Right, yeah.
How did you find, for the people who are listening and watching, that are in that same predicament that you were a few years ago, how did you get started? How did you get the initial traction going for your business?
It was really hard. It was really hard. And so I thought about it for a long time, and really, again, working with other startups. So I'd worked with lots of people who had taken a big risk and had worked, as you say, in jobs where they were very secure jobs, where they're well paid. And they'd somehow taken the plunge, remortgaged, or done something, taken some kind of risk. And I thought, well, if they've done it, I've got to have a go at doing this. Yeah. And so, took that leap. And what initially happened, so I got a small business loan, and when I got that loan, the way it worked was I showed the bank manager at the time all the interest I had from friends of mine that said, we'd really like to do an MBA course. So I showed him a load of emails, and he said, well, I can see your friends want to do this, but I need to see that other people
want to do
so then
other than your parents.
Exactly. Yeah. So what I had to do then was I randomly just emailed people who I'd never met, thinking I was going to get a load of rude responses back from people saying, why are you bothering me? But just to say, would you be interested in a bite-sized MBA course? And I got a load of responses back. I thought, fantastic. So I took those to the manager, and after a few more meetings, I got the small business loan. But then what happened was, when I launched the business and had some sort of content together, I emailed a load of people saying, the content's now ready for the course. No one replied to me. And I thought my email couldn't have been working. So I emailed a load of friends of mine to say, I think my email's not working, because no one's replying. At which point, everyone replied to me and said, no, it's working fine. So that was really difficult. That I felt like I kind of disappeared into kind of a black hole, because, say, no one was interested to start off with. And that was difficult.
So it's that kind of thing where people, initially show interest in these things and thinking, yes, that's something we want to do. We really want to get involved in it. But when it actually comes to the point of putting the money out to actually do these things and booking onto these courses, then you get this apprehension comes back of actually maybe we're not quite ready for this. And that must be a difficult time to then get past that kind of issue.
It was difficult, and one of the things I learned was lots of the people who wanted to run the course genuinely did want to run the course, but what I hadn't appreciated was the way the budgets work and so on. So some of those conversations, it took 2 or 3 years before some of them would still be in contact and still say, we're actually going to run this course. I kind of thought as soon as I launched it, that would be it. It would just take off instantly. But there's always a time, and people just take a long time. They have to have those internal conversations, build into their budgets, talk to other people, and so the various frustrations along those lines. But,
so a couple of barriers: that the bank manager, number one, and then just no response from the people that you thought would be your customers straight away. So the advice presumably is, well, stick with it and maintain, but also think further ahead, and it's going to take longer than necessarily you might think.
Yeah, and it's about, for me, it's about maintaining that passion. I always think the main currency for a startup business is the passion for the business, because people often talk a lot about money, it's about cash flow and so on, but you can run out of money. And then you think, okay, well, I'm going to work in the day. And then if you're passionate about it, you'll do it in the evening, on the weekends, or think about while you're cleaning your teeth or on the bus. And you can't stop it if you're passionate about it, and it will work. So I always think the key really is to focus on those things that you genuinely are interested in, and that will keep you going. I think a business where they've got lots of money in the business but they're bored is dead. And so I think the key is to maintain that passion for what you're doing and go down those lines that you think will have an impact on the customers, and that interests you as an individual is the key.
Great. Should we go into the course in a bit more detail then? So I've not done an MBA before, have you?
No, I haven't done an MBA either, so
but
we're primed to take the course.
Yeah. Can you condense 3 years into 2 minutes for us?
So the way it works then is to initially give people really just a structured step-by-step way of thinking about business, its market, look at how that marketplace is changing. And so we start off the course by looking at the business's industry. So how do they quickly analyse an industry, determine what are the key factors that drive success within the industry and that determine profitability. And the reason we see that's important is once you've understood that market, what's going on with the competitors, what the customers want, what the costs are to the business, we can only then look internally in any kind of meaningful way. And this is key then for professionals and particularly for lawyers, if they're involved in due diligence or understanding why is a client acquiring this asset, why is it buying another business, they have to understand that external marketplace before they can think, okay, I understand why they're buying that piece of real estate or buying another business because I've understood what's going on within their market. So we always say that an internal analysis on any business must always be based upon that rigorous and objective assessment on the competitive environment in which the business operates. Otherwise, that internal analysis is meaningless. Clearly, no business exists within a vacuum. So before you can identify what's important internally, you have to have understood that competitive environment. And that's a key reason then. There's also, again, loads of research on how many M&As fail to create value, how often due diligence fails. It's often because the professionals involved in that whatever acquisition or whatever have got no idea of why the business is doing this and what's going on in their market and why they're making that acquisition. And so we look at the industry first of all, so what's happening in terms of competitors, buyers, suppliers and so on. Then look internally, how do we identify key assets? So what really creates the competitive advantage within that business? So what are the various processes, key people, key pieces of software, key pieces of real estate and so on. And then so once we've then nailed that, thought, okay, this is what's key to this business, this is what creates this competitive advantage, we can then interpret change in a relative way. So if there's a new change in economic conditions or new fashion, new technology or new law, we can think, well, how does that impact on this business, perhaps in a slightly different manner to its competitors or buyers, suppliers. And so we look at how we interpret all change in relative terms. And that's, again, key for law. So often there'll be a new law and people will say, well, that law will impact on businesses in the same way. And lawyers will send newsletters out to their clients that say the same thing to all those clients. Yeah. But of course, it has relative impact. For example, a minimum wage law that appears to be a costly nuisance to a business could actually provide a business with a competitive advantage if it finds it easier or cheaper to comply with than the competition and that's true in terms of any law. And so it gets professionals think more strategically about the businesses they're working with. So there's really three core modules. The first module is where we look at the industry. Second module is where we look internally, and the third module we look at how they interpret change. And then there's a fourth one where we say, well, having used those frameworks to analyse any business, now let's have a go at your business in that fourth module. So that's kind of like the structure of the course. So I know there's a bit of a rush through that. Did that make that? Hopefully that makes sense.
It makes sense.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
So for the people watching and listening, then there will be everybody's an individual, but ultimately they may have collective goals and be running firms. But all of that can apply presumably to individual associates or whoever running their own business internally within their respective firms and departments, but also at the higher and more grand level, the managing partners and chief executives of the firms out there who are coming up with their strategy should be applying that. Let's look at the market first, and then before we scope things internally. Yeah. And then I suppose, is the market then, you have Magic Circle, Silver Circle, they might be operating in the same sort of market, competitiveness. The high street firms are obviously in a completely different ball game. So the external market might be legal services, but they're quite different, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And so what you do then, so all you're doing is, in any of these courses, and it's not just law firms now, so it's any sorts of businesses who want to apply this to either to their clients or to them, all you do is give them the frameworks and they apply themselves. So I don't kind of lead them in terms of saying this is what you should be doing. Yeah. I mean, the idea really is so say the normal model would be to drop a management consultant in who would help people develop their strategies using a set of frameworks and methodologies. The idea is, if you can give people the frameworks themselves that management consultants would use, that that's even more powerful because they understand the dynamics, the different personalities, the culture of the organisation, and that'll be much more powerful. So in answer to the questions, so a variety of different sorts of businesses, but again, it doesn't matter, the same framework applies. It's almost like some kind of algorithm, putting different figures into the algorithm will give it, so it's really, that framework is the key.
So by now you're teaching them how to fish rather than catching the fish for them.
Yeah, exactly, that's it, exactly that,
And that's an interesting aspect, isn't it? Because a lot of firms invest heavily in management consultancy and aspects like that, and with all of those services that come, there's always that scale up at the start where those management consultants coming in have to learn the business, have to understand all that kind of stuff, whereas if you're giving the people within the business those tools, they already understand the business. I guess there's advantages to having someone from the outside coming in and shedding new light on that, but equally the insights you must get internally from people who already understand their business must prove a great benefit in certain circumstances.
It's huge, because what will happen is when you get someone external comes in, they'll often speak to certain individuals within the business, usually perhaps at board level. There'll be all sorts of things going on with people on the front line in sales and so on who won't enter into those conversations. And so when my course is the most powerful within an organisation is when you get a variety of people at different levels within the organisation, all using the same set of frameworks and methodologies, not to develop the strategy, because that would be a nightmare if you go, well, I think we should be doing this and so on, but all saying, okay, for this particular service, what really drives up the costs do we think for this service? And you get all sorts of people at different levels within the organisation saying, well, this is the real issue for us. And there'll be someone at board level, oh, right, I never knew that before. And what's nice about it is, because you've got that step-by-step approach, you haven't got everyone saying, well, I think this, I think that. You just go through one thing at a time, getting a mix of different viewpoints and so on. And that's so powerful for the organisation, because then once they've got all that information, it's much more useful driving a strategy internally then, because people have got that buy-in at every level, think, I've contributed towards the strategy, rather than, I saw that management consultant speaking to someone in the office.
And stuff like that, yes.
So it's much more powerful, I think, and and it really drives it through into the organisation. You've got that much more joined up thinking then for people throughout the organisation if you do it that way.
You've got a really a neat set of videos which you very kindly let us have a look through, and they're great. And I ran through them all in one go because I got quite hooked on that sort of thing. But one of the things that really struck me about what you say, and you got a really good example of Southwest Airlines in your course, and the key phrase, which we've mentioned before on our show, is maximum resource utilisation. Right, so I've got to credit you with that, as I'd never heard of it before doing your course. Can you tell us a bit about that and how that works in that example?
And so the example, so going back to your example, so Southwest Airlines, one of the things I taught. So Southwest Airlines is in a really tough industry, it's a US short-haul airline industry, but it's consistently been an extremely profitable airline. So you think, well, how has it managed to achieve that? You've got very price-sensitive buyers, a highly competitive marketplace. So what they do is they apply the strategy called maximum resource utilisation, which essentially is all about ensuring their planes and pilots spend more time in the air than the competition. So whilst they're spending exactly the same amount of money on those expensive assets, those planes and pilots, as their competitors, they are in effect getting more for their money by getting maximum utilisation out of those expensive resources. So it's almost as though they've got more planes and pilots for the same amount of money. And they do that in a variety of ways. They've got various processes, but apparently the turnaround time, the optimal turnaround time in an airport for when a plane lands, gets the passengers off and gets the next group on, is 15 minutes. They can do it in a 15-minute time frame.
Incredible.
And then because they're using their assets more effectively, it keeps their costs down, and then they can keep their prices down accordingly, win more bars, be more competitive, and so on. I only read this the other day, actually. Apparently what helped them nail that strategy, so when they started the business, they didn't have enough money, and so when the planes landed in the airport and the plane got repossessed, and so they realised they really needed to get this right, so they could get out of the airport as quickly as possible without other of their planes being repossessed. But it's a key. So that strategy is not about pilots spending longer at work. It's about them doing what they're being paid to do, which is spend time in the air, flying planes. And that's the equivalent then within the legal marketplace of lawyers, again, more senior, more expensive lawyers doing or winning the high value, high quality piece of legal work. Clearly, a business is going to be making a loss if it's paying someone a lot of money to be doing work they can't actually charge all that much for. So they want to ensure they're more senior, more expensive lawyers are not doing. There's more routine aspects of due diligence or any routine aspects of work. They want to ensure we're doing the right level of work for their level of ability, their level of experience. And that's really what that's all about.
And presumably, if you're going down the steps, down through associates and paralegals, the people who are looking at the legal work and doing the stuff that requires the knowledge of the law, getting them doing the fee earning aspects rather than doing admin on filing and sort of accounts queries and all those sorts of things, is having the right people doing the right job.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. The example of Southwest Airlines, they did some very other clever things, didn't they? 'Cause I think you said they bought all the same aircraft, so that when it comes time to breakdowns and whatnot, they have all the equipment, and all their mechanics and so on are qualified to deal with every single one of their planes. And the pilots are all trained on one plane as well, so that when one pilot goes off sick, they can just swap one in and out. I can't imagine that working in law quite so well.
But just swapping in and out lawyers.
Just doing identical files and never doing anything different. But nonetheless, it does show that a certain element of having a high level overview, of knowing what you're doing and knowing what your specialist areas are, and also not straying too far from what you know, because they had plenty of opportunity, didn't they, to break into other markets and said, no, we're not doing that. We're in the Southwest, and I think for years they stayed there and didn't expand too far. They could have done international flights and whatnot, but they said that's not what we know. We don't have the jets to do that. Yeah. So they stayed within their own comfort zone, which I think maybe that's a danger for some people, just stretching themselves a bit too far.
Yeah, no, that's it. But the key there, I think, is about the execution. So the strategy itself, the maximum resource utilisation, is an obvious strategy. You think, well, why isn't every airline doing that? And that's because that's always the easy bit. The hard bit is how do they execute their strategy. Yeah. So as you rightly say, some of the things you mentioned, they have these really fast turnaround processes that everyone complies with. So, for example, and other airlines have copied some of these, of course. So, for example, cabin crew collect litter whilst the plane's still in the air to give them less turnaround time on the tarmac itself. Anyone who's flown a short-haul airline recently, there's still crumbs all over the seats, but most of the litter's been removed. So all sorts of things happening internally. So applying that to a law firm, that's executed in an obviously completely different way in a law firm. So it's not so much about lawyers, picking up the same file, but it's more about having the delegation process in place, having the precedents in place, so lawyers are spending their time doing billable work, info services, the software, IT department. The other things that play a key role are where people are sat in their departments, where departments sat in relation to one another. So all those assets have to work together. And what you're trying to end up with is everything working in aligned, interlocked assets. But everyone knows, well, this is the strategy we're trying to pursue. So you've got people in the business development team, in IT, the lawyers, PSLs, and so on, all knowing, okay, this is what we're going for, and this is how we do this in our own individual roles.
And I guess we spoke about this slightly last week as well, when we were covering a news item which was about the issues that CIOs had of implementing change in their industry, and that they have some areas of the industry or some areas of their firms that aren't prepared to change and aren't open to that kind of thing. They've always done something one way, that's the way they want to do it. And where you're talking about this standardized approach that Southwest Airlines did, some of the new technologies and like document automation and all that kind of thing can allow firms to begin to standardize their processes across all levels, which then gives you that aspect of we might not be able to swap a lawyer in and out but everyone should be able to understand at a high level where everything is, the standard documents, the standard processes and stuff, so that you can deal with queries. You can, if someone's absent for some reason, and technology can be a driving force behind that, but it does need uptake from the business. From firms, these people who are stuck in their way and refuse to change, you have to embrace some of that change and look at what you're doing and say, actually, we can change in this area. And I think technology is an enabler of that. It's not the only aspect.
That's the key. The key is to get as many people involved in it as possible. Because I think one of the reasons why technology so often fails, particularly in law firms, is because they kind of think you can just drop it in and it's kind of like, okay, we've implemented it, it's there, now it'll work. I think the difference really more with AI than anything else, from what I've seen, is people often think, well, how is AI going to impact how lawyers work in the future? But I think that one of the big questions as well is, well, how a law is going to impact how AI is developed in the future. And it's about people working together so the IT department working closely, because people generally, different departments don't work very well together generally across law firms. They often, you see the lawyers kind of have the main function and everyone else around them is kind of the support staff. But and that's one of the big issues in terms of implementing technologies into law firms.
And I think you find that in most companies that you have there's a distinct difference between the sort of the fee earners, even in a professional services organisation. You have the consultants who go out there and are earning the money and are doing the deals and the salespeople and stuff. But you have this huge back office staff to support them, which is looked on as a cost to the business, you know, and they're normally where you first begin to make the cuts and things like that, because they're not out earning the money, so we'll cut those aspects. And you know, but that is a hugely important thing of allowing those fee earners to go out there and do that work, allowing the lawyers to go and, you know, earn those jobs and that work. They have to have that support with them. Yeah,
that's the key, and just to free them up to do things and things that they enjoy doing. Because that figure I mentioned earlier on about 20 enjoying the work 20 to 30% time, that was certainly true of me when I was practicing as a lawyer. Maybe even less than that. And what the reason for that was, the times when I'd really enjoy my work, go home at the end of the day, I think, wow, I really helped that business. I'd give them a really niche piece of advice that perhaps they couldn't have got elsewhere, and that's the bit people genuinely enjoy, rather than the kind of the routine stuff, you're just churning out the same kind of things. And so, but those far and few between for me, when I genuinely do something and think, wow, I'm good at my job, I can have an impact, I can help people. But if you've got that sort of software, you've got much more time to think about things and start thinking, okay, I can actually use what I've learned with other examples previously, and just got to spend more time to actually make an impact on a business.
Do people come to you and ask you for advice on what technology they should be looking for, or how they should implement it? I mean, not identifying what you want is one thing, implementing it's another. I mean, there are so many different aspects to a technology solution. Do people come to you for that?
People start the conversations and say, what are other people doing, and we realise we need training in these areas. You know, what would work and what wouldn't work. And then he's kind of asked them where they're up to at the moment. And most firms I work with have a really unclear way or really disjointed way of approaching implementation of any technology. Lots of people have lots of different opinions within the business. One thing which is really key is people often don't know what they've got internally, and I always think that's the starting point, is to be clear about what have you already got in place within the business, because they'll have the conversations about, well, should we be teaching our lawyers to start coding? How much of the back end do they really need to know? And as far as I'm concerned, they don't really need to know all that much about it's quite nice to have a basic overview, perhaps, what's going on, but I think teaching lawyers to code isn't such a wise thing to do, because, as you know, it takes years to do that. It's equivalent to...
it's teaching me to be a lawyer.
Exactly.
I'm a developer, and is that a wasted effort? In me learning? I think it's good to have an overview and look at these things from a higher level, so that you can understand the processes. But I don't think you need to actually start coding as such.
I think that's a tough ask, and I agree. I think it's probably, in my view, it's time wasted, because if you're going to teach me an entirely different industry and discipline, you're going to turn me from a lawyer into a coder. Well, that would take you probably 10 years or 15 years to do it.
Much longer, I think.
In my case, maybe. But I mean, I'd have a better chance of transitioning if I was a corporate lawyer into employment law or real estate law, because those are at least they're within the same industry, so the disciplines aren't that far removed. But there's never any talk of that. There's never any talk of having lawyers with massive skill sets that might fit into the idea of that being that pilot that could fly any plane. That would work, but that never seems to get discussed. Well, let's teach our lawyers how to code, and I think that's a mistake.
And have you seen differences recently in this kind of thing? Are people getting more and more interested in the technology aspects? And like you said, is there an understanding of that technology out there, or are people confused. You know, a lot of stuff's talked about. You know, AI is talked about, blockchain is talked about, and I kind of get the feeling that when it actually comes to lawyers in the industry, they don't actually necessarily understand what all these terms are or how they can be used. And is that what you're seeing when you're talking to these people? Or?
Yeah, they're a mixture of confused and slightly scared, because they kind of think, if they knew no one else was doing anything, they'd be quite happy to carry on as they were before. But they're just thinking about, oh, what is everyone else doing? If other people are implementing these things, then we need to start doing this ourselves. So it's just a mixture of that kind of scared and confused. But most businesses I speak to, they've heard from top level, we need to be doing this. And top level don't know what that is, and then the people they're speaking to don't know what that is either, and so there's just real confusion about what is it we need to be doing and what are other people doing, and
If you're hearing on the grapevine that other people are doing certain things, you can only ever really hope to be as good as they are, and they're going to be further ahead than you. And so if we go back to the course material that you were talking about, and we're sitting in senior management of a law firm somewhere, and we're deciding that yes, we want to make more profits, and technology is one of the drivers for that. Where do we begin? I mean, we talked earlier about starting from the external layer, and also but looking at what we have internally. What might we be looking at, and how might we address that?
Well, so to respond to any change, you always think about, well, how can we respond in a superior, more feasible, or just less costly manner than the competition, based on what we are already good at. So you need a really clear picture of, well, what are our key assets? What drives our competitive advantage? What differentiates us from our competitors? Before you react to any kind of change in the marketplace. So whenever you've got new technology, you want to be thinking about, okay, what is it about our business and what have we already got in place? What are people using? What's working? Taking that approach rather than small business looking at big business saying, well, that's what they're doing. We need to be doing the same thing, because they'll be completely different. So that's why, before you interpret change, it's why you need to look internally and have that rigorous look at what's going on within the business. And so that's the real key, and to think about what's currently happening. Which
might be difficult that'd be easy for some smaller firms where they've got one office, or they are localized in a region or something. That might be straightforward. But I mean, some people that you'll be dealing with will be massive international firms, won't they, with either regional headquarters or headquarters in New York or wherever. So that must be a hard challenge for them. Have you any experience of those people and how they do it themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's a harder process to go through to identify key assets within the business, the bigger the organisation, but it still should be able to take that step-by-step approach to really keep breaking those down, be quite granular about within a department, you keep breaking it down within the department, who are the key people, what they're doing, and extract those. But there's certainly more work involved, but it's certainly possible to do.
Yeah. I mean, our experience of having gone to conferences before is that, the firms and people have identified we need to be clocking onto technology. And I think that fintech, we mentioned that last week, was a big driver behind that. And fintech industry is so much further ahead than the legal tech industry.
More mature. Yeah.
It's much more mature, and they've got more solutions and more offerings. And what we seem to be seeing in the legal tech industry is a lot of firms offering their own accelerators or incubators, whereby they will make available their lawyers as a resource to coders, startup companies, and say, come and join us and help us prepare something, which is wonderful for the startups. I question whether that's a good thing for those firms. I don't know whether they've gone through that exercise of looking at what everybody else is doing, because if they did, they'd realise that a lot of firms are doing that. Loads of firms are doing that. So they are in a competitive marketplace where maybe some of those startup companies are actually part of more than just one accelerator. So there isn't that sort of marriage of relationship between
exclusivity.
Yes. So that's some of their resource going on helping a startup company, which is wonderful, but they might be also helping other firms. But also, we've talked about this lots of times before, that the outcome of that is several rounds of incubation and or accelerator programs, several companies going through that, several solutions, too many usernames and passwords, and then there's just this drop off at the end where people don't engage with it. And your course at some point talks about software only being as useful as it actually is used, if I can paraphrase it that way. If it isn't used, and if people aren't engaged with it early enough, it won't help you.
I mean, the best example of that I've seen is interaction. And so every law firm I work with, implements software, buys the software every year, and people just genuinely don't use it. And the software is intended for people to put their own client data in there, so there's no duplication, they have that joined up thinking, but there's no real incentive for people to start using that software. Everyone's busy, they've got their billable targets, and so when they've come back from a meeting, the last thing they want to do is enter in a load of data. And so when I go to a firm and say, do you use this piece of software? People are like, well, no, we don't. We know we should do it, but we don't use it. And that's the key, and it's going to be an issue with any of those things you're talking about. Firms will spend a fortune on a piece of software. That works, and it's really good, but people just don't use it because it's hard to change people have got their, this is the way I work, and that, and it's worked for me fine for the last decade, 20 years or whatever. But that's the difficulty. It's going to get people to change their approach to how they do their work.
And do you have any steps that you can look at to make that process easier for firms, or any advice in that area of if you're looking to implement a new bit of software, how do you get that uptake from the business? What do you need to look at to understand that area and get people on board with it?
I think it's really about people seeing genuine, tangible benefit to them. And I think if it's just driven down from above, then it's not going to happen. But so I think people have to see, oh, actually, that was really good, and I can see how that benefits me doing it, rather than forcing it. So I think that's why it's key for people to work with providers. I think I've mentioned before, the consultancy approach is really important for businesses, because people can sit down and say, okay, this is the piece of work we do. Let's look at how we can break that down. Which bits can we automate? How can we free people's time up to be doing things that are more interesting for them to do and more beneficial for the client and more profitable for the firm? But I think that's the approach of not parachuting in a piece of technology into the business, but getting people, again, lots of people perhaps within the organisation, which is hard to do, but again, it's better than wasting a load of money on something that no one ever uses.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been in organisations where you're suddenly one day a new icon will appear on your desktop or something like that, and you'll get an email saying you're now supposed to be using this nice bit of this additional bit of software, and you've not had any training in it, you've not had any input into it as to how it's being used, and that's really difficult for people.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I would personally rather see incremental changes and differences that mean it's not going to be massively disruptive for me to do my job, but I can do it slightly better. And I suppose if I was looking at it, I'd think to myself, well, rather than me create a new thing which people are going to open, new desktop item, or if we're using interaction, is there any way that, well, what program is everybody using? Everybody's using Outlook, right? Yeah. Absolutely everyone in the organisation is on email, and we can question whether that's a good idea or not. But the point is, everybody's in there. Is there any way that we can integrate interaction within Outlook so that people don't have to leave Outlook to go and get the client information? Is there a contact tab we can integrate, a ribbon across the top? I don't see that myself an awful lot. And we've spoken to people before about platform design and so on, and if you're going to create a document automation tool and it's going to be within your own platform, that's great. But actually, when people are amending documents and contracts, they're in Word, and so does your solution have a Word add-in? Because if it doesn't, perhaps it should, because people want to work with what's familiar to them rather than having to start with a completely new system. And we might get there eventually, but if you sort of tweak it along the way by saying, okay, we have got a Word add-in and it works that way, and our contacts are within Outlook rather than Interaction or wherever, you could sort of focus on a narrower approach where people have to use fewer things. And we've seen that in examples before where firms are saying, actually, we want fewer things, we don't want more. But it's about making those fewer things better, or at least better integrated. Yeah,
I think that's really important. And as you said, having lots of different things with lots of usernames and passwords, it's just difficult and it's time consuming, isn't it? I think as you rightly say, if you've got just a button on your whatever application you're using, and you just click on that button, something you're really familiar with, and kind of like, okay, I feel comfortable with Word. The worst thing possible is to have a really powerful piece of software with loads of functionality to it, and people look at it and think, oh, I haven't got a clue where to start with that kind of thing, and they're just scared off by it.
And talking about these technology things in general, and going back to your courses and aspects like that, are you finding now that people more and more are looking to have courses online, delivered remotely and things like that? I mean, I'm assuming, a couple of years ago, the assumption was you'd always visit someone's office to deliver these things, deliver these courses. Is that changing in the landscape now? Are people expecting things to be done remotely and online?
Yes, well, really good question. So it's similar to what we've just been talking about. So kind of where the way the industry is working in terms of learning development, people were talking about traditionally everything would be done face to face, and now things were going to move online, and that was the future. Everyone's going to do things online. But the problem with that is people just don't engage as well purely with just something that's online, and there's just a reality. And it's been a real nuisance for me, because it's been a nice way of scaling up a training business is to put things online and people just watch videos online. But just switching from one format to the other one doesn't work on its own. Unfortunately, I wish it did, but it doesn't. And so again, it's something that's nice for a business to say, well, this is what we're going to do because this solves lots of our problems. People just don't do it. And so the way kind of the industry is evolving, and the way I'm kind of positioning my business then in terms of the content, is providing businesses with the content, because face-to-face is still the best way of training people. It gets people in the room, they all know the time they're going to be there, what time they're going to leave, they can't think about anything else, they know it's a bit rude if they start going through the laptop, going through the emails and so on, which of course they will do if they're just watching a video. So to provide businesses with all the content they need, or departments they need, to run everything themselves internally, so you can get just a line manager saying, right, these are the key messages. Because the other thing we all know about learning development, you don't remember all that much when you walk. There'll be a few things that you walk away, and so it should be possible to teach people who can teach people those key things that they can take away with them. And so for me, the way that the industry is evolving isn't saying, okay, we were on face to face, now all of a sudden everything's online. It's to kind of use both approaches and get that blended approach where you give businesses the kind of content they can use. They can run certain things online. They get online resources where people then come together again face to face using those online resources, but again in a meeting environment using those methodologies. I think that's the only way it works. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, you can't just say, right, here's all the online stuff, go and do that. That's going to save everyone money and time and everything. I wish it was like that.
Yeah, because I mean, I know that from from things like mandatory training and stuff, there's a lot of that now in organisations where you have to go to a website and watch your mandatory training on GDPR or something like that. And from my experience, people tend to forget to do it, or the deadline will come up, you have to have watched the video by then. And people don't actually watch the videos, they don't take it in, they skip through it and just to tick it off the list so they don't get pestered by their manager. And I think that's a real good point, that as much as you move your courses online and stuff like that, you don't want it as someone's watching it but they're also distracted by their emails and what they're doing. Having it with someone there engaged with them, that you can ask questions to, that you can engage in a group discussion with, leads to better training. And whereas there's been a push to move these things online, I think you're right that the better training will be done actually face to face with people, and have them learn more from that way. Yeah,
I think that's true, and get input from other people as well. That's always a key part of training, I think.
I always think that training programs are particularly good where at the end of it you have something to do, or you've started the thing to do afterwards, because it's so easy with, you say, with the GDPR thing. You're doing that because you have to, because it's been delegated to you from above. Whereas if I want to do a particular piece of training, or there's something I'm particularly interested in, and there's an outcome focus on it, and something that I have to go away and do and then implement, that's much more powerful. Because I mean, professional service must just have graveyards of training courses where people don't follow up on what they've been taught, and it's good stuff. So maybe we should be thinking about, having attended your course and everybody else's, what are the key things you should be taking away from this, and how are you going to make a big difference to what you're doing? So
that's it. And I think it's a move away from seeing yourself as well as a learning development company. So my business, really, the way I see it is as a resource company, and giving people tools they can develop their strategies themselves, and that's what it's all about. It's a great business model. I mean, the whole GDPR, people selling or safety courses, because businesses just get fantastic. They sell these courses knowing perhaps people aren't going to watch them, but the businesses have to buy them to comply with everything.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful business model. But I think if you're in a business where you actually want to do something of value to businesses, then because I've had conversations with businesses about working alongside businesses and they just kind of just sell these licenses into businesses, just refreshes on this new regulation kind of thing. And it's a way of making money, but it's not a way of...
Yeah. And for GDPR, we don't just pick on that, but for something like that, everybody has to know about it. But it's no good you being trained on it if at the end of the day you have a data breach. So you have to actually know and implement the skills that you're being taught. Because otherwise, what was the point? I mean, you may have some insurance issues where you say, 50-90% of our people have gone through GDPR training, and therefore you tick the box as an organisation. That's all well and good, but if at the end of the day you have a GDPR data breach, then you're in major problems. The key is for people to actually pick it up and action and live by the training. Yeah,
that's it. And I think then as a business, as a provider, you get much more enjoyment out of that. I mean, some of my friends, so I run courses in all sorts of businesses, but also some public sector courses. So I run some courses in the NHS, for example. And what happens on those, which is really fulfilling for me, is that you deliver a course, and throughout the day, when it's a face-to-face course, you see people developing the strategy and those conversations taking place. And it's I think that you have to, as you rightly say, have that engagement thing. Well, how does that impact on my business or the way I work now? And how could that actually be a benefit to me in some sort of area? And that's the only way people actually engage with it. I think, just that whole teaching approach of where kind of, okay, now go away and use it. It's not good for anyone, I don't think.
And it's an interesting thing that you bring up there, that you cover sort of multiple sectors and things like that. We're looking at things mostly from the legal industry point of view here. But do you actually see, the same issues, the same challenges coming up, whatever sector you're in, or are there things that are very specific to certain sectors which just don't overlap? Or do you actually find it's the same everywhere?
Well, that's been really interesting. So the way I kind of got into the public sector, so the NHS contacted me and said, well, I did a course for a small software business where a couple of surgeons left the NHS and set up this software business, and they said, well, this would be good in the NHS, and they contacted someone, and so she got in contact with me to say, oh, we'd like to see what course material you've got. And so I emailed her back saying, it won't be relevant for you. It's just really for the commercial sector, people, business making profit. And she said, rightly, well, let me be the judge of that. So I went in and did some sessions for them. And it was amazing to me how the key concepts are all the same for everyone. There might be different things you put different emphasis on for different organisations, but those kind of concepts, understanding the operating environment, what facts, there might be tweaking some of the terminology. So for an NHS trust, for example, you think about the commissioners being their buyers within the marketplace. But their various suppliers in terms of their medical devices, the staff, of course, the key thing that drives up costs in their business, their competitive other trusts, what's happening in terms of new entrants coming in, Bupa and all those sorts of things, the same sorts of thing, substitutes being in the form of the government's health strategy or Boots Online, all those sorts of things. So the same principles apply, and then so having looked at their industry, okay, what's key, break it down to a particular service, so let's say hip replacements, okay, what facts are important to our customers? Is about speed of getting people out of the hospital again, or is about how likely is they to come back again? All those different factors. But again, you give them the framework, and then okay, and that really surprised me was, actually they're using that framework. I mean, one of the things I talk about, this is one of the best things that ever happened to me for it to be running the business, was so I did this. One of the second framework I cover is something called a strategy canvas. And on the strategy canvas, on the x-axis, so it's derived from something called Blue Ocean Strategy. Okay, on the x-axis, you set out all the factors that are important to the customers. And the vertical y-axis represents the level of investment in those different customer needs. And so you can compare what different businesses are prioritising in terms of the different customer needs. So one of the examples I gave, this NHS Trust, was the comparing Nintendo with PlayStation Xbox, whereas Xbox focused on the 18 to 30-year-old market who wanted high-quality graphics, complex games, lots of levels and so on. Yep. Nintendo said, well, for our target audience, the family audience who don't care about that, all they want is easy-to-play fun games. And you can represent that really clearly using a strategy canvas. So I gave them that example thinking, well, how's that relevant to an NHS trust? So I went away, came back, and they said they'd use that. in thinking about patients, so they said, well, we've always focused on cancer patients. Said we've always focused on adult cancer patients or children's cancer patients, but we've never really focused on adolescents, teenagers who have different issues in terms of appearance change, all those kind of things. It's much tougher for them. Yeah. And so they developed these forums, support networks. On the basis of using this, they won an award in the end for developing this, but using that as a starting point. So for what I thought initially, that's definitely not relevant.
Didn't relate to it.
Yeah, but it does. And so that's what's been really fascinating for me is I just turn up thinking I haven't got it, and I read up on clients beforehand often, but to be honest with you, I wouldn't really need to. I can come into the organisation, tell them the framework, and I'm kind of enlightened myself, thinking, oh wow, it was useful for them.
It does bend to whatever industry you're in or whatever sector you're in.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So it's public sector, private sector, different types of private sector. So I think you talked to lawyers and banks, if I'm not mistaken.
Some banks, management consultants, accountancy firms, yeah.
So it's a whole spectrum of things, but also not just at corporate level, at individual level too, because people at law firms, who will be the majority of the people watching, will be, you're working for a big firm with an umbrella name at the top, but actually you're building your own business within that firm, right? So all the associates who are aspiring partners, you're really running your own business. So these principles can apply to them as equally as well.
Yeah, exactly that. And so sometimes I deliver the course for just an individual department, perhaps for a team away day. And so what they'll be thinking about then is, say they work within real estate, so they'll narrow it down to a particular area of law, then choose a specific type of work within that area of law, so say environmental planning or something like that, and then they'll say, okay, let's do an industry analysis on that particular type of work. So for that specific type of work, for buyers first of all, how price sensitive are clients, what factors are really driving their decision making process when they're determining which law firm to buy from. Then in terms of suppliers, so supply includes supply of labour. So again, you're saying for that specific type of work, what level of seniority really needs to be doing it? Does it have to be done by more senior lawyers, or could it be done by more junior lawyers or paralegals, or automating, making it cheaper and cheaper? Who are the key competitors for that type of work in terms of barriers to entry? So how easy might it be, not for a new law firm, perhaps an existing law firm that doesn't already practice the area of law, to enter into the market? So perhaps it's just one lateral hire, all it takes to enter in. Substitutes might be in-house or doing things online or using account, increasingly big four coming in. But they should be able to choose any particular type of work and then, okay, let's apply that to that. So that then helps them to understand what drives profitability in their particular marketplace. So yeah, you should be able to do that as an individual, developing your career going forward. Again, yeah, as quite specifically for an individual department.
Just recap that for me then. So it's thinking about price sensitivity of the customer, the competition that's already out there, which would be, if you were at firm A, that would be firms B and C and whoever.
Exactly,
else.
Yeah.
Barriers to entry, how easy it is for firms D and E to get into this, and how much of a moat can I build around my own business? Yeah. And what were the others?
So to supply, so how much, how costly is it for me to deliver this area of law, which is normally about the employees, what level of seniority, could more junior lawyers doing this, or could it be automated, making it cheaper? And then the other one is the substitute, so are they doing this in-house, so not direct competitor, but in-house or online, or do all those sorts of things where they might do it themselves, or say using one of those sorts of things, or anything other than a law firm, basically. Yeah.
I mean, it's a big challenge, that, isn't it, for the individuals watching, but it's well worth doing, and it shouldn't take that long because everybody will be in most people will be in a relatively well specialised discipline that won't stretch into others. I mean, that won't necessarily apply for high street firms where they are doing private client work, which could be wills or conveyancing and 2 or 3 different disciplines. But certainly for the regional and the bigger firms, you'll tend to be focused department specific. So carrying out that exercise, certainly worth doing, I think. You're not so much in control of your resource as, if you're a partner maybe, but resourcing is always a problem for lawyers, isn't it? Because everyone's on 3 months notice, and everyone has to be busy before you can get a budget for it. So it's 6 to 9 months before you can actually fill the gap.
Right, yeah.
But technology, and going back to the awareness of the technology and what you already have, asking questions of the people internally and saying, what have we got that I can use to make this thing go faster and smoother? That's probably an important piece for people.
Yeah, I think that's it. And it's always bringing it back to them, and you're always asking that question: is there real opportunity here? Is it real? Can we win? And is it worth it? Then is it too much work to actually drive that through?
Well, that's a good point, isn't it? Because if you carry on the sort of analysis, you might say, well, okay, the next level of it is to say how much is it going to cost me to do this work, is there any point me even pitching for this? As we do see firms now, a lot of firms are bringing in their own external counsel and expertise, people like you and people, management accountants and so on, to say, well, our project managers, and say, well, look, how do we make this process run smoothly? But also, if we could pitch for this work, can we actually do it profitably? And there's got to be a sort of yes, let's go for it, or no, let's not. It's just not worth our time doing it. We see that more and more coming in now. And there are, there'll be technology tools which we can explore in future shows to talk about how that can be done.
Yeah, but that's always the key. It's got to be driven by, is this actually profitable for the firm to do? And it's always surprised me how often firms will pitch for pieces of work which they pretty much know is not going to be profitable for the organisation, but they like the sound of the name of the company. When I can expect there is a driver for that in terms of, they can, if they're allowed to advertise they work with that company, that could win additional work. So I guess they make that trade-off then. But I think some firms just blindly just chase after things without really thinking it through.
I can see that. Great. So, if people want to get in touch with you and find out more, how do they go about doing that?
So buildyourownmba.com is our website. So I can email me. So Rupert Vernals at buildyourownmba.com.
And we'll put all the links in the descriptions to the videos and everything like that, so that people can find that.
So want to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. It's like another way. So I'm more than happy to connect with people who've seen this. So
Great. Okay. Well, brilliant. Thanks for that, Rupert. That's great. And I enjoyed the recap of what I've been through before, but I've had the privilege, and so I always enjoy catching up. So we'll put that up in the near future, and as Pete says, with all the show notes and whatnot, and hopefully people will get in touch and ask you some questions and challenge themselves a bit with their own strategy.
Yeah, and hopefully we might be able to get you back on again to talk about some other aspects as well in the future. That'd be great. It's good to talk to you.
Fantastic.
Lovely.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Thanks
for that.
Yeah. So until we get to our episode next week, we'll see you again.
Bye.